I put down the phone and just stood there in the middle of the staff room staring at the wall. My half-eaten granola bar was still on the table. My coffee had gone cold. Neither of those things mattered anymore. What mattered was what my fiancé had just said to me, in that careful, apologetic tone he only used when he'd already made a decision and didn't want to fight about it. My mother thinks it might be better if you didn't come to the gala this year. I'd asked him to repeat it, not because I hadn't heard, because I wanted to give him the chance to hear himself. He repeated it. I told him I had to get back to work. I should explain what I do because it matters to this story. I'm an elementary school teacher, grade 4 at a public school in Mississauga. I've been doing it for 7 years. I know every kid in my class by the sound of their sneakers in the hallway. I know which ones haven't eaten breakfast, which ones are being bullied on the bus, which ones are holding something heavy at home that they don't have the words for yet. I show up at 7:15 every morning and I don't leave until 5, sometimes 6, and on weekends I'm usually at my kitchen table with a pile of marking and a cold cup of tea. It's not glamorous, I know that. His mother knew that too, and she made sure I did. His name is Colin. We'd been together for 4 years, engaged for 8 months. He's an architect. His family is what people in the GTA sometimes call old money, which mostly means they've been wealthy long enough that they've forgotten what it felt like not to be. His mother, I'll call her his mother because that's the only title she ever really claimed, runs a charitable foundation. Annual gala, black tie, downtown Toronto hotel, the kind of event where people pay $1,000 a plate to feel good about themselves while eating duck confit. She'd invited me the year before, my first year as Colin's girlfriend. I borrowed a dress from my friend Priya and spent 45 minutes in the bathroom before we left because I was so nervous. The whole evening she'd introduced me to people as Colin's friend. Not girlfriend. Friend. This year, 8 months after our engagement, I was apparently not invited at all. The conversation happened on a Tuesday. Colin called me during my lunch break, which should have been my first sign that something was coming, because he never called during the day. She's worried about the optics, he said. I didn't understand what that meant. Optics of what? She has a lot of donors coming, people from the private sector, board members from the hospital foundation. She just thinks it might be complicated to explain your role. My role. I asked him what role exactly needed explaining. He was quiet for a moment. You know that you're a teacher. There it was. I want to be fair here because I've thought about this conversation many times since. He didn't say it cruelly. He said it the way someone says a thing they know is wrong but have decided not to fight. He said it like he was reading from a script his mother had handed him, and he just not put it down. I said, Colin, she's fundraising for a children's literacy foundation. Silence. She's raising money for kids to learn to read, and she doesn't want their teacher there. More silence. I'll think about it, he said. Which meant, I've already agreed with her, and I'm hoping you'll drop it. I went back to my classroom. 14 9-year-olds were waiting for me to finish a lesson on long division. I finished it. I answered every hand that went up. I stayed 20 minutes late to help a kid named Marcus who was struggling, because that's what you do. I didn't cry until I got to my car. That night, Colin came over. He brought pad thai from the place I like on Dundance, which was his version of an apology that wasn't technically an apology. We ate at my kitchen table, and he explained his mother's reasoning in the careful, lawyer-adjacent way he sometimes talked when he wanted something to sound more reasonable than it was. The donors, he said, were business people. They responded to certain signals. His mother had spent years cultivating a specific image for the foundation, and part of that image was, "Is what?" I asked. He looked down at his food. Success. Status. She wants people there who signal a certain kind of Colin. He stopped. I have a master's degree, I said. I have been shaping how 30 kids a year understand the world since I was 23 years old. 3 of my former students are in the gifted program now because of interventions I made when they were 8. Last spring, a parent cried in my classroom because I was the first person who'd noticed her son might have dyslexia. I paused. What signals does that send? He didn't answer, which was, in its own way, an answer. I asked him if he'd stood up for me, if he'd told his mother this was not acceptable. He said he told her I might be upset. I put down my fork. I told him I needed some time to think. He left the pad thai. I didn't eat any more of it. What I didn't tell Colin, what I decided in those next few days, very quietly, very deliberately, was that I wasn't going to fight about the gala, not because I'd accepted it, but because I didn't have the energy to beg for a seat at a table where I'd never been truly welcome. And also, I was scheduled to work. Our school board runs a community tutoring program on weekend evenings in December, a volunteer initiative I'd signed up for months earlier, pairing older students with community volunteers to help struggling readers in under-resourced families. It ran on the same Saturday as the gala. I'd forgotten when the gala dates were announced, and then I remembered, and then I just didn't mention it. I told Colin I wasn't coming to the gala. He looked relieved, which told me everything. I told him I had other commitments, which was true. He nodded, kissed me on the cheek, said his mother would be glad I understood, said we'd do something nice the following weekend to make up for it. I smiled and said that sounded lovely. The tutoring session ran from 5 to 8:30. There were 12 of us, 4 teachers, a librarian, a retired professor, a few university students, and a woman who'd driven 40 minutes from Brampton because she believed in the program. We worked in a community center on the east end of the city. Folding tables, cheap chairs, fluorescent lights, a coffee maker that took 4 minutes to produce anything drinkable. It was one of my favorite evenings of the year. I got home around 9:15. I made toast. I watched half an episode of something I can't even remember now. I was asleep by 10:30. My phone woke me up at 11:47. It was a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer. I'm glad I did. Is this Miss Claire Beaumont? It was a woman's voice. Calm, professional, like someone used to making difficult calls. I said yes. My name is Nina. I'm calling on behalf of Westfield Academy's board. I apologize for the late hour. We were given your name as an emergency contact for a student, a child named Theo Harrington Voss. He's 8 years old. He was brought into the ER at St. Michael's about an hour ago. I sat up in bed. Theo Harrington Voss was not my student, but I knew who he was. His parents were donors to our school's literacy program. They'd been at our spring fundraiser. His mother had spoken to me there for almost 20 minutes about early reading interventions, genuinely engaged, wanting to know more. Theo had been assessed earlier that year and identified as having significant reading difficulties, and his parents were in the process of getting him support. I'd given them my card. I'd said, if you have any questions about the school board's resources, feel free to reach out. I had no idea why I was being called in the middle of the night. I'm sorry, I said. Is he all right? What happened? He's stable, Nina said. But this is a little unusual. His parents are at the hospital now. His father was taken ill earlier this evening at a fundraising event. His mother had to leave the gala when it happened. A pause. When I called Theo's emergency contacts, your name was in his file. You met his mother at a fundraiser this spring. She listed you as a secondary contact for school-related matters. I remembered now. His mother had asked if that was okay. I'd said of course. What happened to his father, I asked. A pause. He collapsed at the event. Cardiac episode. The paramedics responded quickly, and he was resuscitated on scene. He's in ICU now. He's expected to recover, but it was significant. I was already out of bed. Theo's at the hospital with his grandmother, Nina continued. He's frightened and asking for someone he knows from school. His mother asked if we could try to reach you. She said Theo mentioned you several times after the spring fundraiser. Said you were the teacher who got it. Another pause. I know it's late. You're under no obligation. I'll go, I said. Give me the address. I'm already getting my coat. St. Michael's on a Saturday night in December is organized chaos in a specific, particular way. There's a hum to it. Not frantic, not calm, but something in between. A kind of controlled urgency that fills every hallway and waiting room. I'd been in enough hospitals with students' families over the years to know how to navigate it. I found Theo in a family waiting room on the fourth floor. He was sitting with a small woman I took to be his grandmother, wearing a coat that was too big for him and holding a stuffed dog that was missing one eye. When he saw me, something in his face shifted. Not quite relief, but the recognition of a familiar thing in an unfamiliar place. Ms. Bersenier. Beaumont, he said. Hey, buddy, I said. I heard you had a big night. His grandmother stood up and introduced herself. Her English was accented, Polish, I thought, and her eyes were red, but she held herself very straight. She thanked me for coming. She told me her daughter-in-law was with her son now, and they didn't know how long it would be. I sat down next to Theo. He didn't say much, and I didn't push. I asked him if his stuffed dog had a name. Captain, he said. Good name, I said. Does Captain like hospitals? He thought about it. Not really, but he comes anyway. That's what friends do, I said. We sat there for a while. The grandmother fell asleep in her chair around 1 in the morning. Theo leaned against my arm and eventually fell asleep too. I was still there at 2:30 when his mother came out. I recognized her from the spring fundraiser. Dark hair, precise in the way tired people get precise when they're holding themselves together by willpower alone. She stopped when she saw me. She pressed her hand over her mouth for a moment. You came, she said. Of course, I said. She sat down across from me, and for a few minutes neither of us spoke. Theo was asleep against my shoulder. I didn't want to move. He's going to be okay, she said, about her husband. They said he got very lucky. Someone at the Gala knew CPR and started compressions right away before the paramedics arrived. She exhaled. They said those 4 minutes were the difference. I nodded. She looked at me. I don't know how to thank you for coming tonight. You don't need to, I said. I wanted to. She shook her head slowly. We were at a fundraiser for the Literacy Foundation, for children's education, and I had to leave my son with his grandmother in a hospital waiting room at midnight. She stopped. The people who actually work with children, who actually do this, they weren't invited tonight. She said it quietly, almost to herself. I didn't ask what she meant. I thought maybe I already knew. I found out the next week. I wasn't going to. I had decided in those days after the gala that whatever happened at that event wasn't my business, that I had other things to focus on. But Theo's mother called me. She wanted to talk about getting Theo some additional reading support, and we spoke for almost an hour, and somewhere in the middle of it she said, "Can I ask you something personal?" I said yes. Were you invited to the Harrington Voss Foundation Gala this year? Your name came up a few weeks ago in a conversation I had with one of the other board members. Someone had suggested inviting more educators, people who actually work in the field, and I heard your name mentioned. And then I heard it was decided against. I was quiet. I don't want to put you in an uncomfortable position, she said. I wanted you to know that not everyone agreed with that decision. I thanked her. I told her it was all right. It was, and it wasn't. You can hold two things at once. That evening, Colin came over. I'd been thinking about what I wanted to say for a while, long before the gala, if I'm honest. But something about that night at the hospital, sitting in a plastic chair at 2 in the morning, holding a kid I barely knew while his mother was in an ICU waiting for news about her husband, had clarified something for me. The people who do the work are rarely the ones in the room when the thanks are handed out. I was tired of not being in the room. I was more tired, though, of being with someone who didn't notice I was missing. I told Colin how I felt. I told him about the night at the hospital, about Theo, about what his mother had said. I told him that his silence, when he'd called me during lunch, when he'd come with Pad Dai, all the quiet, agreeable silences, had been its own kind of answer. He listened. He said he was sorry. He said he should have stood up for me. He said his mother was, he paused, complicated. He said he would talk to her. And maybe he meant it. Maybe he would have. But here's what I'd learned. Sitting in that waiting room, I knew what it looked like when someone showed up. Not when the circumstances were perfect. Not when it was comfortable. Not when someone had called ahead and confirmed the optics. Just showed up. Because the situation asked for it and they decided that mattered. Colin had never once shown up like that for me. I gave him back his ring on a Thursday, he cried, which surprised me. I hugged him because I'm human and I still cared about him, even then. I told him I hoped he figured out what kind of man he wanted to be. I meant that too. His mother sent me a card 2 weeks later. No message. Just her name, printed on the cardstock above the foundation's logo. I'm not sure what she meant by it. I put it in the recycling bin. Theo is in grade 5 now. He tested 2 reading levels above where he was this time last year. His mother volunteers twice a month with the tutoring program. She drives 40 minutes each way, every time. And she always brings coffee for the other volunteers. Last fall, she told me the foundation had changed its Gala invitation policy. More educators, more community workers, more people who actually do the work. Less, her word, signaling. I told her that sounded like a good change. She said it was overdue. I think about Colin sometimes, the way you think about a house you used to live in, with a kind of neutral recognition, aware that it was your life for a while, aware that it isn't anymore. I think about that Tuesday lunch break, and his careful voice, and the pad dye he brought as an apology that wasn't one, and all the moments I chose to wait for him to figure it out on his own. What I know now, that I didn't know then, is that you can't wait for someone to decide you're worth showing up for. Some people will get there, some people won't. And you'll know which kind you're with long before you're ready to admit it. I know that now. It's worth knowing. I thought about that Tuesday a lot. The pad dye going cold on my kitchen table. Colin's careful voice on the phone delivering his mother's verdict like it was a scheduling conflict and not a verdict on my worth. I thought about how I sat in my car in the school parking lot afterward and cried, and then went back inside to help Marcus with his long division, because the kids didn't know, and they needed me anyway. What I keep coming back to is this. The things we choose to do when no one's watching, when there's no gala, no donor table, no applause, those are the things that actually shape who we are. I showed up to that tutoring session on a Saturday evening in December not because anyone asked me to perform. I showed up because I'd made a commitment, and because those kids needed someone in their corner, and because that's the kind of person I'd decided to be a long time ago. Not for recognition, just because it was right. That's not nothing. It took me a while to understand that, but it's not nothing. And here's what I've learned about integrity, real integrity. Not the kind you perform at fundraising galas. It tends to find its way back to you. Not in a mystical sense, just in the ordinary, accumulated way that choices have consequences. I spent years choosing to show up for my students, for their families, for the community program, for the Tuesday evenings when the coffee machine took 4 minutes and the chairs were uncomfortable and nobody was watching. And when Theo needed someone at 11:47 on a Saturday night, his mother's first call was to me. Not because I was impressive, because I had shown up consistently without needing to be asked twice. Colin never understood that. He was waiting for the right moment to be brave. He was always going to have that conversation with his mother next week. Take a stand at the next opportunity. Find a better time to say what needed to be said. And I understand how that happens. It's not that he was a cruel person. He just hadn't developed the habit of doing the hard thing when the hard thing was inconvenient. That habit, I think, is something you build on purpose. You build it in small moments over years until it becomes who you are. Colin hadn't built it, and no amount of pad dye was going to substitute for it. What I want, for anyone who recognizes something of themselves in this story, is for them to ask the honest question, am I building that habit? Not in the grand gestures. The gestures are easy, in the small ones. The Tuesday evenings. The phone call you make even though it's late. The moment you choose to speak up for someone even when silence would be more comfortable. That's where character actually lives, in the Tuesday evenings. I gave back the ring on a Thursday. I cried a little and I meant it, and then I drove home and made toast and went to sleep. The next Monday, I was back in my classroom at 7:15. There were 30 kids waiting for me, and some of them hadn't eaten breakfast, and one of them was going to need extra help that afternoon. I was exactly where I was supposed to be.